After years of delays, the New Mutants, the final Fox-produced X-Men movie, has finally reached theaters. So today I'm going to stop and rank all 13 Fox-produced X-Men movies from the worst to the best one final time. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of the X-Men movies. My list isn't the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. One more thing before we get started, I want to give a huge thanks to Epic Games for sponsoring this video. Fortnite Season 4 Nexus War just dropped. Here's the awesome part. It's a Marvel crossover. You're watching an X-Men ranking, so obviously you love the Marvel characters. This is the perfect time to jump into Fortnite. If you haven't downloaded Fortnite already, you can do so at my link down below in the description, totally free. I first joined the Fortnite craze a couple years back when Thanos was in the game surrounding Infinity War. Season 4 takes that Marvel crossover idea and takes it to bonkers other levels. Check it out, you're teaming up with Iron Man, Thor, She-Hulk, Storm, Doctor Doom, Wolverine, and more. We're going to S.H.I.E.L.D.'s Helicarrier, as well as other iconic Marvel locations like Doctor Doom's Fortress. You get to blast people with Doctor Doom's gauntlets. You get to turn into that shield that Groot built around himself at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy. Roll over, guys. Wolverine's going berserker. It's Fortnite, but it's jam-packed with Marvel. It's like a free Marvel game, and you can download Fortnite Season 4 Nexus War at my link down below in the description for free. And let's get started. In last place is X-Men Origins Wolverine, the perfect cinematic example of a polished turd, where they threw a bunch of money and professionals at a terrible script. But the part where it gets really weird is that everything both looks really expensive and really bad. Perfect example of this is Wolverine's claws that are unbelievably cartoonish and unconvincing. Beyond that, much like the scene of Wolverine in the bathroom, it destroys everything it touches. The X-Men continuity? Destroyed. Sabretooth from the first movie? Destroyed. Wolverine's origin story? Destroyed. Project Weapon X? Destroyed. The Merc with a Mouth Deadpool? Destroyed. Nothing about this movie works besides Hugh Jackman and Liev Schreiber's performances. The tone and humor are off, and by the time you get to the third act and the big twist, you realize that the entire plot is being held together by a series of contrivances and coincidences. And what absolutely solidifies this one as the worst is that the execution is just as bad as the ideas. Coming in at number 12 is X-Men The Last Stand, a disappointing conclusion to the original X-Men trilogy that doesn't do justice to any of its many plot lines. The movie is 15 minutes shy of 2 hours long, and it attempts to tackle the Cure, Magneto's Mutant Brotherhood, and the Phoenix Saga. So the movie's many characters and plot lines are left competing for the limited screen time, and this means the movie just has to rush through plot point after plot point. This means that characters like Cyclops and Professor X are killed off, and the movie doesn't have time to process the fact that these iconic characters have died before it moves on to the next plot point. All of these characters and subplots require more time to be set up, developed, and play out, but there's simply not enough screen time. And because the movie is trying to set up so many characters and plot lines, there's virtually no action in the first hour and 15 minutes of the film. Beyond that, it's a total waste of the Phoenix Saga. It takes one of the most iconic X-Men storylines and makes it feel like a tacked on subplot that doesn't in any way complement the other plots to the film. Despite having several great storylines at its core and sprinkling what should be potent deaths throughout its runtime, the movie doesn't live up to any of its potential. Next up is X-Men Apocalypse. On paper, Apocalypse is a great follow-up to Days of Future Past, but the execution here does not live up to the source material at all. For some reason, they decided to do a 2-year turnaround on the film.
Not a great plan.
And that's just not a lot of time to develop the story and the script, especially for a franchise that's 15 years old. And I think you see that in the movie that was delivered that just has kind of a jumbled mess of plot lines of varying quality. I thought the plot line about Magneto and his family was fantastic. As a mini story inside of this film, it's great. And then in the back half of the film, he's just kind of floating there making garbage spin over a city. And then it cuts back to the Apocalypse plotline, and they take this iconic X-Men villain and just write him in the laziest and least interesting way possible. So much so that there's literally a scene where he walks up to a TV, touches it, and says, "Learning."
What are you doing?
So that he can learn about the 20th century. And why is Mystique suddenly the leader of the X-Men, besides the fact that Jennifer Lawrence had rising star power at the time? While this one does have some great moments, it's one of the weakest films overall. Bringing us into the top 10 is Dark Phoenix. Fox and Simon Kinberg's second attempt at the Dark Phoenix saga is an improvement over the previous attempt, but not by much. On the positive side, Michael Fassbender is just great as Magneto. In all of these movies, whether good or bad, he is always a standout in them. Also, the third act of this film, the train sequence, which was actually reshoots, great action sequence. All of our mutants get an opportunity to shine. The rest of the movie, however, not so much. Right off the bat, Charles Xavier's just acting out of character. We've seen him optimistic a lot. We've seen him depressed a little bit, but he's never just been an overt, arrogant douchebag before, so it doesn't feel like the same character. Beyond that, the villains are unbelievably bland, with an unclear motivation, and the individuals have no distinct personalities at all. They're just generic evil shapeshifters. Apparently, they originally planned to use the scroll, but the MCU got there first, so they had to change their plan, and with so many writing constraints, they just couldn't pull off something interesting or unique with the script. So while they had this incredible story at its core, and they were closing out a 20-year run of movies, you just don't feel any of that. Real quick, as a point of reference, all the movies I've covered up to this point in time, I would go negative on, and all the movies I'm going to cover from this point forward, I would go positive on and say I do recommend. Coming in at number 9 is The Wolverine. James Manggold's original take on The Wolverine is a bit like a prototype for what he perfected with Logan. It still brings in all these influences from westerns and samurai films. The action is visceral and it can be very emotional, and it's designed to be a character study, but for whatever reason, I don't think this movie ever fully comes together. On paper, there's a bunch of things that I think are really cool about what they were trying to do with this film, but I never enjoy it nearly as much as I think I'm going to, and this is a movie that I don't re-explore all that often. I think a big part of the problem here is that it's 3/4 of a very good Wolverine movie, and then as you move into the final 25%, it just feels like someone different directed the film. The first 2 acts of it essentially have a pretty grounded story with fantastical things happening, and then you move into the final act and you have this very cartoonish Silver Samurai showing up for a final showdown, and it just doesn't mesh all that well with what came before, and this is the type of third act mistake that makes you leave the movie with a bad taste in your mouth, even though you enjoyed the majority of the film. Number 8 is The New Mutants, a movie that was originally supposed to come out in April of 2018, over 2 years ago, but the studio wanted to do reshoots, but the cast were too busy, and then there was a studio acquisition, and then the year 2020 happened, and finally Disney decided to just drop it in theaters this past week. And I actually had a pretty good time with it. It felt a bit to me like The Breakfast Club as a horror movie set in the X-Men universe. I mean, it's not as good as that bizarre premise, but it still kind of worked for me, largely because of the cast of characters themselves. Each of them are kind of quirky and nuanced enough that you care about learning more about their backstory. They have nice banter between them, so the movie has a nice sense of humor without having a bunch of one-liners and zingers or contrived scenarios. It's all just kind of organic humor based off the relationships. Now, there's a lot of problems here. You could tell that they tried to rework the movie in editing just a little bit. The finale doesn't pay off as much as it probably should, but in general, it's a lot better than some people are attempting to claim. Next up is Deadpool 2. This is a movie that does every single thing that it can to attempt to entertain the audience. It's as if there wasn't a single idea that they said no to, and every idea that was proposed, every joke that was proposed in the brainstorming sessions, they actually crammed into the movie. We've got tragedy, the X-Men, X-Force, an evil school, a prison, and oh yeah, the movie is about Cable traveling through time. Now, I don't have issues with any of these particular plot lines. There's just way too many of them. Especially the first half of the film, it just felt like it was flying from one plot line to the next plot line to the next plot line. This is another example of a movie that had a 2-year turnaround on the film.
Not a great plan.
And I think you see that in the script where they didn't have enough time to sort through what were the good ideas and what were the best ideas and focus the film. The movie's very entertaining. It's just not nearly as good as it should be. And I feel like if they'd spent like 6 more months on the script, it might have been better than the original. Also, I have seen Once Upon a Deadpool, and it's an interesting concept. There's a novelty of watching it one time. The Fred Savage stuff is really funny, but it's not really a standalone unique film. It basically plays like an edited for television version of Deadpool 2 with Fred Savage cameos. Number 6 is the original X-Men. Probably the best thing that this movie did was lay a fantastic foundation for the future. The movie does a great job of world building and helping you understand the politics of this world, the different factions, the rules of how things work, understanding where mutants come from. And the way it does it very wisely is using Rogue and Wolverine as kind of these point of view characters that we follow them on their journey as they're introduced to Xavier's School for the Gifted, and while they learn about the school and the world, we as the audience learn about all of this as well. And the casting here is great. Of course, you have Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, who is actually the runner-up. Dougray Scott was originally cast as Wolverine, but had to drop out because of a scheduling conflict. So Hugh Jackman steps in at the last minute and becomes this massive movie star of the last 20 years. And Dougray Scott is a side character in Taken 3 and Batwoman. You also have, of course, Ian McKellen as Magneto and Patrick Stewart as Charles Xavier, and it's tough to imagine anyone better as these characters. Now, when it comes to the actual plot itself, it's a little bit thin. It feels pretty episodic, and there's not much action until you get to the second half of the film. But in general, it manages to be captivating just by bringing us into this world of mutants. Kicking off our top 5 is X-Men Days of Future Past. Now, I know for a lot of you, this is like a top 3, maybe your number 1 favorite X-Men movie. And I think it's very good. It's just not fully top tier for me. On the good side, the Quicksilver sequence, of course, is incredible, both in the fact that it's entertaining and funny. It's also just a very cool looking sequence. Also, I love time travel stories, and the idea of using time travel to kind of bridge the original trilogy with the First Class franchise, very cool. And we get to see these characters in very different places in their life, especially, of course, Charles Xavier in a depressed phase of his life. I love that we get to see a bit of a resolution to the Stuart McKellen version of their characters in the futures as they've worked through decades of conflict, but they realize that they've always had a friendship at their core. Honestly, I can't articulate why it's not a top tier X-Men movie for me. It doesn't make any specific mistakes that I'm holding against it. It just doesn't stir up those emotions that my top 3 stirs up inside of me. In 4th place is X2, X-Men United. This is a great example of how to do a sequel right. The first film did a great job of laying the foundation and establishing great characters that you wanted to spend more time with, but it had some story issues. This movie builds on the great foundation, fixes the story issues, gives you more of what you loved in the first movie with the action, the characters, the dynamics, while telling a bigger, more complex story and having bigger, grander, and longer action sequences. It kicks off with this great action sequence with Nightcrawler at the White House, and it never lets up. It just keeps building the tension and the stakes, both in terms of the main conflict of the plot, as well as just in the interpersonal dynamics of the X-Men themselves, all leading up to this big, gigantic finale and sacrifice from Jean Grey that's a very clear homage to Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, one of my favorite movies of all time. And for a movie with a lot of characters and plot lines, it never feels overstuffed or unfocused. This is a great example of how to make a multi-layered story that's still action-packed. Real quick, before I give you my top 3, remember to share your ranking down below in the comment section. My list isn't the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. Also, if you've enjoyed this video, I've got more X-Men videos just like this. After this video, check out this playlist right up here to see some of my other X-Men rankings with the villains, the final battles, and my fan casting for an MCU version of the X-Men. Coming in 3rd place is X-Men First Class. This movie was so much better than I thought it was going to be, and it's been this gift that keeps on giving. When I first saw the trailers, I did not think this movie looked good, and I did not think it was a good idea for the film. Then I went to go see it, and I was like, that's actually pretty good. And every time I rewatch it, I like it just a little bit more and a little bit more. So much so that it's now cracked my top 3 favorite X-Men movies. And there's so many different reasons for this. Part of it is the cast, where James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender are fantastic versions of Charles Xavier and Magneto without feeling like they're doing a copy of what Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart did so well. Also, Matthew Vaughn just gave the movie a very cool vibe. It's set during the 1960s, so he almost gave it like this James Bond 1960s spy movies aesthetic to it that just makes it stand out and feel unique. Kevin Bacon is a great forgotten villain that doesn't get nearly enough credit, and the 3rd act is filled with great moments, especially when Eric gets his revenge on Sebastian. The movie's one kind of misstep amongst all of this is that it underutilizes the actual First Class itself, but beyond that, a great X-Men movie. Our runner-up is Deadpool, one of the freshest and most fun comic book movies of all time. Ryan Reynolds and the writers spent years trying to get this movie made as a passion project, probably leaked it onto the internet themselves to try and get the fandom excited about it to force the studio to greenlight it, which worked, and you just feel that passion in every single frame of the movie. There's also the one-in-the-generation casting of Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool, where it's kind of impossible to think of anyone else in his generation being a better pick to play this character, from his inherent sense of humor, how he delivers lines, to his physicality. He was perfectly designed to play this role, and it's one that he's so passionate about. This is also a great example of how to take a fairly straightforward story that we've seen many times before and make it compelling and intriguing through great execution. By just making it non-linear enough and sprinkling in Deadpool's chaotic ADD energy into it, you take something very familiar and make it very exciting, all in all leading to one of the most entertaining comic book movies of the last decade. But in first place is Logan. After James Manggold did a decent job with the Wolverine, he returned with Logan and just knocked it out of the park. This is easily the darkest and most thematically rich film on this list. Every single scene is about death, regret, and redemption. Fun stuff. In many ways, if not most ways, this movie probably has more in common with Westerns than it does with the comic book movie genre. It's also our final study in these two characters that we'd spent nearly 20 years with, and that makes every choice they make have extra weight to it. We know them so well, and they know each other so well. We've seen their flaws and their strengths. We've seen them grow both as individuals and together, and we're seeing the final formation of that in this film. Compared to virtually every other movie on this list, the story and the stakes are really small. But that's exactly why this movie works, because we care about the characters. It's about their journey and the conclusion to their story, not about trying to wow us with a bunch of spectacle. In a genre that seems to be all about going bigger and thinking bigger means better, this is a movie that knows that it's all about the characters. Do we care about them, and do we want to go on the journey with them? In the case of this movie, I wanted to go on the journey, and it led to such a satisfying conclusion to these two characters that we've loved over the past 20 years. So it comes in at number 1. Remember to check out Fortnite Season 4 Nexus War at the link down below in the description. It's totally free. Or if you want more of my X-Men content right now, check out that playlist right over there. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.